Welcome to Canada Files. I'm Valerie Pringle. My guest today is Steven Pinker, who's been listed as one of the world's most influential thinkers by Time and Foreign Policy magazines. He's a professor of psychology at Harvard and the author of many prize-winning and best-selling books, including The Language Instinct, The Blank Slate, The Better Angels of Our Nature, Enlightenment Now, and Rationality. He's endlessly curious about the mystery of who we are and why. Steven Pinker, hello.
Hello.
So is your most singular quality curiosity?
I would like to think that.
Because, what led you to even want to study psychology in the first place?
Well, what could be more interesting than the human mind? So we all have one. We all are interested in other people's minds. And when I discovered that there was a science of the mind, thanks to the Time Life series of books on science, which my parents bought for me when I was a young teenager, that had monthly volumes, each with a different color on the spine, electricity and magnetism and evolution and the stars and planets, and then one of them was the mind. And it was a revelation that you could actually study the mind the way you study electricity and magnetism or the planets.
But you were that kid, weren't you? Reading the encyclopedia, just fun stuff like that.
I did. We had the World Book Encyclopedia, and I would pull out a volume and just read articles at random. This was, of course, way before the internet.
But it seems, with the books that you've written, you've become expert not only in, psycholinguistics and, cognitive science, et cetera, but ecology and economics and biology and all those other sciences to sort of fill out the arguments that you want to make.
Yeah, that's the great thing about studying the human mind, in that it's related to everything else. The social sciences are about products of the human mind, societies and legal systems and social contracts that we implicitly negotiate with each other. The arts and humanities are also about products of the mind, music and fiction and sculpture. So it can take me anywhere. And because I'm interested in human nature, including its emotional and moral and political baggage, it leads me to questions like, does human nature confine us to a single social organization so that hopes for progress are futile because, as they say, you can't change human nature? And I push back against that, and in looking at how we have made progress, it does push me to learn some history of medicine and public health and technology and law and government and war and many other topics.
But you still maintain science is mankind's greatest achievement. Why?
One, just the intellectual beauty and power and just wonder of it. The fact that we can answer questions like, when did life originate? When did the universe originate? We know how old the universe is. That's amazing. We know what the basis of heredity is, or how the planet was shaped. But also it is science that has enriched and expanded human welfare. We live more than twice as long as humans did for millennia. Life expectancy at birth, most traditional societies, around 30. Today it's around 80 in developed countries and more than 70 worldwide, and that's thanks to advances in public health and medicine. We see more of the world. We have access to drama and music and art from different centuries. Technology and science has really enriched what it means to live a human life.
Well, and this, what you were just saying is so much the basis of Enlightenment Now, which is probably your best known work. You say it was sparked by a student asking a question, why should I live? And you listen to that and this sense perhaps that many people have that the world is a dark and a hopeless place, and you decided to be a defender of reason and objectivity, and you were sick of stupid. So you went after that, or went after not the student, but the question.
Well, I answered it sincerely. I did not, it wasn't meant sarcastically or facetiously. The very fact that we're asking these questions shows that we've been endowed with a capacity for reason. The one that evolution gave us was, kind of puny, but we can expand it with education and open discourse and exchange of ideas. And we can apply it to extend to others what we want for ourselves. We want certain things for ourselves because that's the reason we're here to begin with. Our ancestors depended on food and sex and love and caring for children and appreciation of and understanding of the natural world. Those are wired into us for a good reason, that they're why we're here. Given that reason tells me that there's nothing special about me just because I'm me, at least I'm not going to convince you of that, then that provides the basis for ethics and morals, namely treating others as one would demands to be treated oneself. So it's a positive vision for what we ought to care for. It does not depend on scripture or dogma or violent revolution or struggle. And I localize it mostly around the Enlightenment of the 18th century, but it had antecedents in ancient Greece and other parts of the world. And then I had to make the case that is this utopian? Is it idealistic? Is it romantic? And that's when the data come in. I say, no, it's actually worked. If you actually look how we've done since the 18th century, you'd rather be alive now. For one thing, you'd probably be dead if you were in the 18th century because life expectancy was barely more than 30.
Now, there are a couple of things that, from that book that, were interesting. I mean, there's so many facts, points, anecdotes that are amazing. Public health stuff was really interesting to me. The people who've, found germs or, vaccines. You talk about the day that Salk's vaccine was proven for polio and, the global celebration. We forget all about that. Like, why aren't we, throwing ticker tape parades for the COVID vaccine?
Yeah, why not? I agree. And I introduced that historical anecdote because part of the problem with this philosophy, worldview, you can call it Enlightenment ideals or humanism, is that it doesn't get people's pulse going. You can salute the flag and you can sing anthems, you can sing hymns, but no one really sings hymns to the human race or to reason or just to science. But there have been moments when people really do appreciate the science as a glorious human undertaking. And the day that the efficacy and safety of the Salk vaccine was announced, when there was a worldwide celebration of factory whistles blowing and church bells ringing and people hugging strangers, I think it would be good if we recaptured some of that, because it's better for all of us than celebrating victories in war or rallying around the flag or all the other things that get people's blood pumping.
One of the other lines that I remember from that section was, you say, as a psycholinguist who's written a whole book on the past tense, that your favorite sentence in the history of the world, as you're reading Wikipedia, is the sentence, or even just the phrase, smallpox was.
Smallpox was a disease. Yes, the fact that it's in the past tense indicates that that is a disease that has been eradicated. A mind-blowing accomplishment, given that it killed hundreds of millions of people in the 20th century alone, and then for it to be finally eradicated wiped off the face of the earth is just something that the species should be proud of.
So, in spite of endless examples in this book, and this was received and widely read, it's still a controversial book. And a lot of people really took issue with you being a defender of the status quo. Just keep going the way we're going, all good. We're going in the right direction.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that a defense of reason, humanism, and science would be particularly controversial in an era where it would seem that these ideals need all the help they can get. But it was controversial. There is a mindset that the whole system is so corrupt and rotten that we should just burn it to the ground because anything that rises out of the ashes is bound to be better than what we have now. And I think that comes from kind of a spoiled society that fails to appreciate how much we have accomplished compared to the way life is usually lived, with early death and infectious disease and constant raiding and feuding. and people not traveling more than a few miles from where they were born. And that's the way human life was lived for millennia. It's easy to take for granted what we now enjoy and to fail to appreciate how easily things can degenerate, which we see if we look at war zones where people drop like flies from cholera and have to walk for miles to get drinking water. Now, all of these accomplishments are, they're the wallpaper. We don't thank anyone for flush toilets, but it's really good that we have them.
But you do acknowledge that we do have some serious, existential threats, of course, that it isn't like, things are just vastly improving and it's an upward trajectory. I mean, and you do cite climate change for sure and populism.
Yeah, well, it is an upward trajectory, but it's not a linear one, or as they say, a monotonic one, namely one that keeps going up and up and up without any backtracking or wiggles. And that's because problems are inevitable. The laws of the universe don't particularly care about our well-being. In fact, if anything, they kind of try to grind us down, and it's only through human effort and ingenuity that we achieve any progress. And so, far from being a license to complacency, it's the exact opposite. It's the only reason that we've achieved this progress is because people have recognized problems, tried to think up solutions, tried to implement them, sometimes in the face of fierce opposition. And that's what we have to continue to do to deal with the problems that we face today. It seems like a silly thing to have to point out, but I do often find myself having to point it out, and that is that improvement isn't perfection, and that a decline doesn't mean a disappearance. So there's less poverty than there used to be. That doesn't mean there's no poverty. There are fewer wars than there used to be. Doesn't mean there are no wars. You got to be able to think both those thoughts at the same time. That we want to drive down the bad things as low as possible. We're nowhere near having eliminated them, but we're better off than we were. That's kind of an eensy-weensy bit of math that you just got to keep in mind in appreciating human progress.
Why did you, or when did you decide to sort of move from the academic sphere to the cultural sphere and say, I'm going to be a public and a popular, you hope, communicator of science and how these things work?
Yeah. Well, I did the academic thing of publishing papers in peer-reviewed journals, and I still do. And I appreciated accessible science in other fields like evolution and paleontology and cosmology and medicine, but no one had done it for my field, cognitive science, including the psychology of language. And I thought maybe I could try my hand at it, and I'd written a couple of academic books, and editors at the university presses, Harvard Press and MIT Press, said, we think you could do it. Your writing doesn't suck as much as other academics.
Your writing is fun. So, it's really good writing. You must have gotten pleasure from that.
I did. In fact, I even wrote a book on writing,
yes,
applying what I know from the science of language to the challenge of writing clear and graceful for prose. So I tried it with a book called The Language Instinct, partly because when people would say, what do you do for a living? I say, I study language. And the response would always be, wow, that's really interesting. And it is really interesting. And there's
how
lots
humans
stuff.
Acquire language.
Yeah, exactly. How we acquire it, how we use it, where languages come from, why there's so many of them, why they change over time, who decides what's correct and incorrect. Lots of questions that everyone's curious about, and I thought I would try my hand at explaining them in clear language. And I was told by some of my colleagues, well, it'll be in the bookstores for 6 weeks, then you'll go back to your life as an academic. But it did, people bought it and read it, and it, I tried to tell a coherent story about language, not just an encyclopedia, by kind of unifying under the idea that language is an instinct. I took the term from Darwin, who said man has an instinctive tendency to speak, as we see in the babble of our young children. So I called it the language instinct, but I ended the book by raising the question, what are our other instincts? What are our fears and loves and desires and aesthetic reactions and habits of learning and thinking? And so that led to a book called How the Mind Works, which was what I tried to do for everything else, what I did for language. Why do we enjoy music? Why are we afraid of snakes? Why do we remember recent things more than long ago things? But that led to the, one thing leads to another, and that led to the question, since I did try to explain the mind in an overall evolutionary framework, what the different parts of the mind allow our ancestors to do that allowed them to be shaped by Darwin's process of natural selection, and that it actually is not a reactionary doctrine. It doesn't mean we can't improve, because number one, we have improved, so it's got to be possible. And number two, if you believe that human nature is complex, as I do, that is, it's not just some instincts we've inherited from our primate ancestors, but we have the ability to come up with new ideas, to share them with language. We have a sense of empathy. We have self-control. We have these big frontal lobes that can inhibit our impulses. It means that there's a lot that we can do above and beyond what our ancestors did by coming up with new ideas, sharing them, figuring out ways of bringing out our better angels, as I later alluded to them. And one thing leads to another, and then I wrote a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, from the phrase by Abraham Lincoln, on the parts of human nature that allow us to be peaceful, and on the historical fact that whenever you measure violence over the course of history, you see that it's come down. That is why I wrote those books, to push back against the idea that if there is human nature, then we're doomed to perpetual strife and greed, and to point out that we have made progress, therefore it's possible to make progress, and possible to make more progress.
When you look at the brain, cognition, as you've studied these things, is there anything that has most astonished you?
Oh, everything. How does a child acquire a language and then express his or her thoughts and understand new sentences and talk about abstract imaginary worlds and hypothetical possibilities? How we can both conceive those things and share ideas about them with one another. And kids are doing it at the age of 3. That's pretty amazing. But really, especially when you look at the limitations of artificial intelligence, the fact that self-driving cars should be easy. I mean, it's just like you turn a wheel, you press the gas, you press the brake, and you don't bump into things. How hard could it be? Turns out to be fantastically hard, and we don't have safe self-driving cars. We don't know when we're even going to get them, despite billions of dollars invested in them. And that's because things like seeing the world, achieving several goals, like getting where you want but not killing anyone, motor control, controlling our arms and limbs, common sense. If a guy's holding up a cardboard sign that says detour, if there's a billboard with a school bus, that's not the same as a school bus. All of these things that the human mind does effortlessly, but we are learning, are really, really hard to duplicate in silicon.
Are you among those who's afraid, concerned about AI, or embracing what it might do?
Yeah, I'm somewhat concerned. I'm not among the people sometimes called AI doomers who think that AI will lead to the extinction of the human race. I don't stay up at night worrying about that for a number of reasons. But there are, as with any technology, there are misuses like impersonating people and large-scale fraud, possibly large-scale unemployment, although it hasn't happened yet. And other potential dangers, engineering, superbugs or bioweapons. On the other hand, the promise is spectacular too, because someone who studies the human mind, I know that our minds are kind of limited in a lot of things. We can't process lots and lots of data. Artificial intelligence in principle can. I go to my doctor, there's no way he can digest the implications of the 3 billion base pairs of my DNA and my entire medical history and the entire medical literature, which just grows every year. Why would any human be able to accumulate all that information? That's something that an artificial intelligence system in principle could do much better than a human brain.
What do you want to study next? What makes you curious about the brain that you haven't been able to pull apart yet?
I'm working on a phenomenon called common knowledge, which in the technical sense means everyone knowing that everyone knows something. That is, I know something, you know it, you know that I know it, I know that you know that I know that you know it ad infinitum. It seems like a impossible cognitive feat. Your mind starts to spin, but we have a sense that something is kind of out there, that everyone knows it and knows that everyone else knows it. And I think it drives a lot of our social life, a lot of our language, a lot of our economic and political arrangements. And that's going to be the topic of my next book.
Because it seems there is still so much we don't know about the brain in terms of pathology and disease and mental illness.
Oh, our ignorance is stupendous, particularly about mental illness. Well, about everything, really. The more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know.
So you say education is, basically the flagship of progress. It seems like at heart you're a teacher. You love that.
I do love it, and even before I decided to become a professor, I was a high school math tutor. That's how I put myself through college, math and science. But also just the mindset of being curious, challenging one's own beliefs, both because that's what science does, but also the more you know about the brain, the more you know that it is a fallible system, so you can't trust your own intuitions. That's why we need science, because a lot of things that we believe aren't true. And therefore to get into the habit of questioning, of asking for evidence that the evidence is good, just that open-mindedness.
Well, open-mindedness is interesting, but one of the things that you've become more involved in latterly at Harvard is the whole issue of academic freedom, which is a really challenging topic, and I guess in your career it must kind of interest you, confound you, that maybe what people can say or not say is more problematic in the academy.
That's happening more and more in academia, where there are attacks both from the right and from the left. At least in the United States, the attacks from the right tend to come from outside the university, from legislatures and politicians, particularly in southern states. Within academia, though, it comes from the left, that there are a lot of things about race and sex and gender and sexuality and colonialism that, as they say, get you canceled. People are driven out of their careers, articles get censored or withdrawn. And this is bad both for the advancement of knowledge, because you can't advance knowledge unless you can explore ideas, and also for the reputation of both academia and science. So I have co-founded a Council on Academic Freedom at Harvard. Now, Harvard's just a university, but it is kind of a brand. People care about what happens, and so I hope it'll be an inspiration to other universities.
At this point in your career, how do you feel? You think, have I started to understand who we are and why? Am I, partway there? Am I a lot of the way there?
Yeah, I like to think that I'm partway there. I mean, I like to think that I have more insight into what makes us tick than when I was an undergraduate, both because I've learned more and because the sciences of mind have advanced.
But nowhere near the end.
Oh, that's an understatement.
And your office is full of books.
A lot of books, yeah.
The last question we usually ask is, what does being Canadian mean to you? Lasting effect, impact, how it shaped you?
I think that it does promote a kind of calm rationality, of a problem-solving mindset, of not getting caught up in various fanaticisms, of a kind of benevolent moderation. Canada is, as I've said, for all its problems, and Canadians above all are aware of them, as you always are when you're right up against them. But Canada is, I think, the 11th or 12th happiest country in the world, and in indexes of really good countries, social progress index of all the good things you want in a country, safety and health and affluence and equal rights. Canada also is about 10 or 11. I mean, it's very Canadian not to be number one, I guess.
But America should be happier. That's always the weirdest thing, isn't it?
Canada just beats the pants off the United States in any of these measures.
But, you know, America should be happier, economically stronger, things are good, but Americans not so happy.
Not so happy, and and the French aren't so happy, even though France is a pretty nice place to live. But anyway, so Canada does a lot of things right. It has a lot of great accomplishments, peacekeeping forces, and the world's longest undefended border, welcoming of immigrants, including my grandparents, and continuing to do so. A parliamentary system that is, if you're a Canadian, you're well aware of all the follies, but still, as far as political systems go, it's not so bad compared to other countries. So I appreciate being Canadian, and I appreciate Canada.
Well, it's been a pleasure to spend time with your brain. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And we'll be back next week with another episode of Canada Files.
The preceding program was made possible through the generous support of Richard Pilosoff, as well as the following donors: Ted and Alice Kernahan, Tony and Sherry Fell, Mary Davey, the Browning Watt Foundation, David and Cheryl Carr, Bryce and Nikki Douglas, Richard Wernham and Julia West, Earl and Janice Oborn, the Linwood Family Foundation, Steve and Catherine Coxford, Michael McCain and family, Clinch House Foundation, the 63 Foundation, and by the Central Canadian Public Television Association.